Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of October of 2023. Today we have a significant number of very interesting updates, so let's start. Of course, we expect some updates at first that we are going to start with Avdiivka, but currently Avdiivka is not the only direction that the Russians chose for offensive operation. Basically, the Russians launched full-scale offensive operation all over the combat line, starting from Kupiansk and ending somewhere in the vicinity of Bradley Square. And that's why we're going to move from north to the south, because we had significant number of updates and very interesting geolocated videos. And the first battle took place somewhere in the vicinity of Kislovka-Kotlarovka. The Russians managed to maintain their positions between Yahidna and Orlyanka and Ivanovka. And as a result of clashes that took place during the previous days, the Russians managed to establish control over the edge positions and to capture the edge line right in front of the city. There, Russians launched some kind of regrouping and some kind of reorganizations, and as soon as they complete, the Russians were planning to start offensive operation in direction of Ivanovka using like armored fist and infantry. But something went wrong, and at some period of time, at some moment of that preparation, the Ukrainians sent their armored tanks, to attack the Russian positions. And basically, according to this geolocation, we see that the Russians didn't expect that unexpected Ukrainian attack. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians managed to get almost the trenches. We see on the top of this video the Russian soldiers running away from the Ukrainian tank, and probably the Ukrainians expected some kind of reinforcement reserves, and at some moment of this video the Russians sent armored fists, significant armored fists that included up to 3 or 4 tanks and few armored personal carriers, the evacuation machines obviously, and the Russians were trying to help their infantry on the edge positions not to lose this territory, because that was very important area for further offensive operation in direction of Ivanovka and Kislovka-Kotlarovka. The Ukrainians tank driver probably received some message that the Russians launched attack, and that's why the Ukrainians took a decision to step back, and as a result of that attack the Russians lost 1 tank, 1 machine, not destroyed but probably damaged, and later that machine was evacuated and the Ukrainians managed to step back. So when talking about this map, the situation was as following. The Ukrainians were moving from Ivanovka in direction of Russian trenches in this area. So they moved in this direction, and from this position the Ukrainians started bombing and attacking the Russian forces in these trenches. Under the pressure of Ukrainian tanks, the Russians took a decision to step back because it was very dangerous to stand there further, and the Russians retreated further to the north. Meanwhile, the Russian armored fist started movement from Yahidne-Zatyshe in direction of Ukrainian tank. And when the Ukrainian tank got information from drones, from reconnaissance, from intelligence that the Russians have almost got the Ukrainian position, the position of Ukrainian tank, the Ukrainians took a decision to step back, and without any losses the Ukrainians returned to the positions on Ivanovka. But from the other side we see that the Russians also haven't lost their edge positions, and they managed to return back and to reinforce this area before further or upcoming counter-offensive operation of the Ukrainians that obviously will take place maybe even within the next 12 hours. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Kupiansk direction, the Ukrainians lost 105 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles including 1 tank, and 3 artillery systems. The level of losses is very heavy. I remind you that yesterday the Ukrainians lost 280 soldiers. So we see that there is a very fierce clashes and battles in this area with the purpose to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense belt and to encircle the Ukrainian forces in the city, in the villages like Kislovka, Kotlarovka and Stepovo-Novoselivka. Now we're moving further to the south and going to discuss the second major battle, major Russian direction, and the battle took place in the vicinity of Novoyegorovka. For these purposes, the Russians also were using significant number of armored vehicles, armored personal carriers. So the Russians collected and concentrated up to 20 armored vehicles, and they launched offensive operation, storm offensive operation in direction of Novoyegorovka. But the Ukrainian intelligence managed to discover the Russian forces, their movements, and as a result of artillery strikes, the Russians had significant losses. A very big number of armored vehicles and tanks were destroyed as a result of counter-artillery artillery fire. The only thing I must say that that battle took place not just for one day. Obviously, the Ukrainians reported that all these destroyed armored vehicles were destroyed during a week, so 5 days. The Russians were planning and trying to storm Novoyegorovka, but the Ukrainians hold their positions and they didn't step back. This is a very important direction, and currently the Russians haven't managed to achieve almost nothing from this area. I believe that they're going to make more attempts, but for now the Russians need to regroup. They need to bring fresh forces, and then they will start everything from the beginning. This is the primary target of the Russians, to attack in direction of Novoyegorovka, but for now no progress on the ground. When talking about the entire situation, one more time, the Russians were moving from the city by the name of Kovalyovka along the tree lines. Then they got this tree line and started movement along this area. And the main purpose was to get to this interception of tree lines, to on this area to stretch their forces as much as possible, and from this position, using the broad frontline attack, to start offensive operation in Novoyegorovka from the north. So that was the Russian plan, but as you can see according to the video, the Russians were defeated. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Liman direction, the Ukrainians lost 55 soldiers and 2 armored vehicles. So as you can see, the level of losses is the same as was yesterday, the day before yesterday, and probably a month ago. So no changes on the ground. Now we are moving to Avdiivka, the major and the main battle of the Russians in those days. As you can see, there are significant number of icons, and the Russians, to attack Avdiivka and Ukrainian forces in this area, also use significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, armored infantry machines, mining equipment, a lot of artillery systems. We have already received lots of updates, a lot of geolocated confirmations that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over a few territories, and the most important is that as a result of offensive operation using significant number of armored vehicles, the Russians established control over the Terikon that located on the southwest of Krasnogorovka and on the north of Avdiivka. This territory currently located on the Russian control. They completed the clearing operation, and currently the Russians established control over every single movement of the Ukrainians that take place on the northern part of Avdiivka. Basically, the Russians control everything. The only question how the Russians are going to use this information and these benefits. We got a very interesting video from this direction, very interesting details. This video we got on the 10th of October. I believe you have already seen this video. Just on this scene, just on this small photo, we can calculate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 armored vehicles that were already in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka trying to storm Avdiivka from the north. Furthermore, there are more tanks and armored vehicles were heading from the north. Significant number of forces, and the Ukrainian sources are saying that the Russians involved up to 50 armored vehicles. So probably, I think that battle, that attack, was probably the first attack with such a significant number of armored vehicles from Russian side since the Second World War, since the Kursk battle or something like this. And as a result of that attack, the Russians established control. But the most important part of this video is that Ukrainians, having Russian forces right on the edge positions, weren't using artillery. The Ukrainians didn't attack, even as we don't see on this video even a single, a single area with that the Ukrainians attacked with artillery forces or cluster rounds or something like this. And the Russian sources reported that as a result of counter-artillery duels, the Russians managed to suppress completely Ukrainian artillery forces. The Ukrainians were completely suppressed, significant number of artillery systems were destroyed, and basically the Russians had possibilities to attack using just these armored vehicles without being afraid of being attacked by the Ukrainian forces. For example, on the South Donetsk direction, in the vicinity of Pervomaiska, the Russians published a lot of videos how they managed to discover the Ukrainian artillery systems. On this video, we see the howitzer, German howitzer Panzerhaubitze 2000. And as a result of artillery strike of using the Krasnopol hit, that artillery system was destroyed. The second artillery system was destroyed a little bit to the south from our original area. Another artillery system was destroyed as a result of Krasnopol hit. So the Russians managed to suppress this territory without any problems. When talking about Avdiivka itself, the Russians continue bombing and attacking this city using all types of weapons they have. As a result of FAB 500 strikes, the Russians managed to pin down and to destroy a lot of Ukrainian positions, a lot of ammo depots of 110th Brigade, of 53rd Motorized Brigade, and many other types of forces that Ukrainians have in this direction. Furthermore, the Russians started bombing and attacking the water pump station on the east Avdiivka edge positions. As a result of FAB strikes, the Ukrainians had significant damage, and probably this is another artillery preparation before the next wave of attack of the Russian forces in this direction. So something like this. When to complete the story of the northern part, of course, we need to mention one important thing, that by the 8 p.m. of the local time on the 12th of October, we still haven't received even a single geolocated video that confirms that the Russians managed to cross the railways and establish control or to enter the northern part of Berdichi and the eastern part of Stepova. A lot of Russian military experts have already reported that the Russians have already entered those cities. The only geolocated video we have is how the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to get the railways. So this area was captured by the Russians. They managed to land their infantry. They managed to dig in deeper in this area. They managed to bring also significant number of armored personnel carriers, a lot of infantry, but no video from Berdichi. But as we can see, the railways tracks are located very close to the cities, so I assume that the Russians crossed the railways and attacked the cities, but we need more time to understand their entire picture. Furthermore, the Russians, to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to counterattack, bombed Avdiivka heavily, the northern part, the area where yesterday they managed to destroy a train with fuel, and today they continue attacking the same territory because the coal mine and the chemical plant is the main industrial area in this city and the main area with concentration of Ukrainian forces. And of course, the Russians understand that they still haven't established a strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the railways. To create a strong foothold, first of all, they need to capture at least one city. They need to do the same as the Ukrainians did in Rabotina. They capture Rabotina, and at least from this perspective, we can consider a small foothold, a small area with a roof above your head where you can dig in deeper. So the Russians need to do this because the Ukrainians continue regrouping and they continue sending more and more forces in this direction. And currently, the Ukrainians are trying to concentrate their forces between the cities by the name of Yevgenievka, the city by the name of Solovyova, the city by the name of Achertiny, and Arkhangelsk. So this is the area of the main concentration of Ukrainian forces. For this concentration, the Ukrainians during the first day were trying to use the city and the railway station by the name of Achertiny, but the Russians controlled the situation, and as a result of missile strike, the entire railway station was destroyed. During the first day, we got the report from the Ministry of Defense that as a result of the strike, the Ukrainians lost the forces of 31st Mechanized Brigade lost up to 90 soldiers and something around 10 armored vehicles. So that's why the Ukrainians took a decision to use the railway stations that located a little bit further to the west in the vicinity of Novogrodov, let's say Progress and so on. But the further main logistics center you have, the more time you need to spend while regrouping your forces. Currently, the Ukrainians don't have a lot of positions to concentrate forces. For example, on the western part of Avdiivka, there is a lot of significant number of rivers, lakes, and so on, with almost destroyed bridges in this area. On the northern part, there is a railways that also something like a barrier that you need to cross if you want to attack. So basically, the Ukrainians will have just one position where they can concentrate forces, and this is the area we are talking about. And this is a very tiny, very small area that is under complete Russian control, fire control. And the Russians will continue bombing this territory, trying to break the Ukrainian plans of concentrating forces. So we'll see what is going to be next on the northern flank. When talking about the southern flank, during the previous day, the Russians mainly were focused to develop their positions to the west in direction of Pervomayskaya. And we got another video how the Russian armored fist, also significant number of tanks, personal carriers and infantry were moving along the streets of Pervomaiska in direction of Nitailova. At some point the Russian personal carrier or tank got on minefields and was destroyed, at least damaged. The tank wasn't destroyed, and this is very interesting. During the previous days we saw significant number of videos how the Russian tanks entered the minefields, the mines blown up, but the tank and armored vehicle survived. We saw the same story in Kupinsk direction, on the north of Avdiivka, in this area. So maybe the Ukrainians are using very small mines, or maybe the Russians found a solution with something like defense equipment on the armored vehicles. Anyway, the Russians were attacking to the west, trying to develop their positions, and the main purpose of that attack was to create another attack road as far as possible from Severna. By this attack, the Russians were trying to bypass Severna and Toninka along the tree lines and to encircle this territory and basically to cut the Ukrainian supply and support that goes from the cities by the name of Yasnobrodovka, let's say, in direction of Toninka. So this is one of the main supply roads that Ukrainians currently use. The second supply road is from Umanska to Orlovka and also from Toninka. So to cut these territories, to cut these roads, the Russians need to first move to the west and then to the north. When talking about Severna, the Russians still haven't entered the city, the villages, but the sources are saying that they managed to half encircle this territory, and currently this territory is under very heavy fire. I'll remind you that these two villages are under protection probably of 53rd Mechanized Brigade. When talking about southern part of Avdiivka, as we discussed in the previous video, as a result of an unexpected and very powerful attack with the infantry, the Russians enter Avdiivka from the south, and currently the Russians are trying to dig in deeper and to prepare the foothold and the bridgehead before further offensive operation inside of Avdiivka from the south. This is another very powerful and very dangerous point of pressure, because currently the Ukrainians are being attacked from many directions, from the north, from the east, from the south, from the west, from every single direction. The Ukrainians don't know what to do, and it is very difficult to move your forces from one side to another because you are always under very heavy fire. When talking about Donetsk direction, probably as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost up to 340 soldiers. Of course, some of the losses took place in Bakhmut direction, but the major part of the losses took place exactly in this area. The Ukrainians, to slow down and to stop the Russians, at least for a small part of their speed, attacked the Russian logistic roads and logistic areas, and as a result of one of those strikes or sabotage operation, the Ukrainians managed to destroy the bridge between Yasinovata and Gorlovka, the bridge that the Russians were using to supply and support their forces who are currently trying to storm Avdiivka. Of course, this is a very big logistical losses for the Russians, and I have few questions about this situation. The first question is that the Russians are saying that that bridge wasn't destroyed as a result of missile strike. We saw a lot of strikes in the past, missile strikes in the past, but it's impossible to destroy the bridge using one missile. So as I understand, and according to sources on the ground, that bridge was mined by the Ukrainians and destroyed using the explosive. So, and this is a very big question for the Russian counter-intelligence forces, why this strategical bridge wasn't under any protection, and that this bridge was destroyed just with small explosives. Very interesting situation. Of course, I believe the Russians have some solutions on that case, but anyway, this is a small logistical problem, an issue that the Russians need to solve in a very near future. When talking about South Donetsk direction, the Russians restarted their offensive operation in direction of Novomikhailivka. Today, the Ukrainians published another video of another attempt of attack by the Russian forces trying to storm the city from the south. The thing that you can see on the video, another significantly greatest convoy of Russian armored vehicles heading to the south, trying to attack the Ukrainian positions. Another video with maybe dozens of armored vehicles, including tanks, personal carriers, infantry machines, and so on. The Russians managed to land their infantry, and as a result of very unexpected and fast attack, the Russians captured the Ukrainian trenches and the Ukrainian shelters and the bridgehead. And basically, the Russians have already created a very powerful zone, a very powerful front line, combat line, to start another offensive operation in direction of Novomikhailivka. But this operation probably the most interesting for me because I don't understand how the Russians are planning to attack Novomikhailivka from the south without attacking the same city from the north. And according to information we have, the Russians haven't managed to complete the clearing operation of stronghold by the name of Zverinets. Maybe they have, but we haven't received even a single video confirmation. And if the Russians manage to clear the stronghold by the name of Zverinets, that means that very soon, in a day or in a two, we're going to get more updates and first updates about northern offensive operation in Novomikhailivka as well. During the previous clashes, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions of their artillery forces that were attacking the Russians while the first waves of attacks, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians suppressed significant number of hidden Ukrainian artillery positions. As a result of Lancet strikes, at least 2 artillery systems were destroyed to the west of Novomikhailivka in the cities like Elizavetovka and Ilivka, so significant success as well. But the Ukrainians also published the video how they managed to discover the Russian artillery systems that were supporting the Russians during attack on Novomikhailivka, and as a result of HIMARS strike, that artillery system was destroyed. The Russians, to support their forces, were using mainly TOS flamethrower systems, but as we know, TOS systems doesn't have a very long range, just 6 kilometers. It's like maximum distance they can attack. And of course the Ukrainians managed to discover that system using drones, and they managed to discover the parking position, and after they sent coordinates to artillery squads, the Ukrainians made HIMARS strike or maybe artillery strike, and as a result of that strike the parking place was damaged. On this video we don't see that Ukrainians managed to destroy the entire TOS flamethrower system because we don't see fire. Maybe this is just the smoke and just the sand as a result of strike, so we can't say that that system was destroyed as a result of that strike. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours on the South Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 165 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. The level of losses also is very heavy in comparison with the previous days. So those were the most important and the most powerful offensives that the Russians launched all over the combat line. South Donetsk direction, Novomikhailivka, Avdiivka area, then we have Novoyegorovka area on Liman direction, and Kislovka-Kotlerovka on Kupinsk direction. At some places, at some front lines, the Russians managed to get some success. At some areas, the Russians were defeated, like the area of Novoyegorovka, where we saw significant number of destroyed armored vehicles and tanks. But the important thing that I was surprised with is the number of tanks that were involved in every single operation. Thousands of tanks, and this is sometimes very scary because the Russians managed to increase the production of most modern weapon, and sometimes I had the feeling that the Russians, every single Russian soldier have his own personal tank. That was the feeling that I got when I was making this video and when I was watching all these geolocations during the day. That every single Russian soldier have a personal tank. Maybe some soldiers have 2 or 3 tanks, because I haven't seen such a big number of tanks nowhere. And when talking even about Rabotin and Verbova, the Ukrainians were defeated and they lost everything, and the final phase of offensive operation, the Ukrainians were using just infantry without any progress. And currently the Russians have already launched a counter-offensive operation in Orekhov. For example, there was a video today, the video was very long, up to 20 minutes, of Russian counter-offensive operation on the southern part of Rabotina salient. The Russians were attacking to the north, and as a result of that attack they managed to capture these positions, and basically they managed to cut this small salient on the south, on the fields between Rabotina and Verbova. Basically, this is a very dangerous situation, because from this position the Russians can establish the fire control over the fields between these two strategical tactical positions in Rabotina and Verbova. So according to these small updates, I can make conclusion that the Ukrainian offensive operation in Rabotina collapsed, and the Ukrainians currently try to find a solution how to step back from this area without minimal losses in their reputation. And as I understand, it's impossible. Anyway, their reputation is ruined. Furthermore, the Ukrainians maybe try to change their focus, and they continue concentration of forces between Novodanilovka and Kopany, but the Russians control this territory as well, and today we got significant number of videos of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian supply cars, supply machines. Everything that were moving along these roads were destroyed under the Russian fire. Some positions were destroyed with artillery systems. So complete fire control. Another opinion, another thought, that maybe currently we see the usage of North Korean 150mm rounds. I don't know, but now I see that everything is so massive from the Russian side. Tanks, massive. Missiles, massive. Drones, massive number. Artillery round, massive number. Soldiers, massive number. I don't know how long the Ukrainians are able to stand against such a pressure without any supply and support from the Western countries, because currently the Western countries changed their focus, and every single bullet, every single rocket, every single missile goes to Israel, and the Ukrainians are getting nothing. So we'll see what is going to be next. When talking about Kherson direction, the Russians reported that as a result of artillery bombings and clashes, the Ukrainians lost another 50 soldiers. And the main losses the Ukrainians has as a result of strikes using the FAB 500, FAB 1500 and missile strikes. On this video we see how the Russians managed to discover in the central part of Nikopol the Ukrainian ammo depot, and as a result of FAB 500 strike the entire ammo depot was destroyed, and probably significant number of Ukrainians who were somewhere in the east area around. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.